Today, let's sew some cute fleece mittens perfect for winter or last minute gifts. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content. In today's Stitchmas video, we are making some mittens. So as you can see, I have lots of different colors of fleece here. I'm going to go with this white and black. And then for this, they have this checkered pattern. So I am going to be matching. So you can see I'm just lining up where those lines are for both the front and the back so that I can make sure that my mittens will have a nice pattern match effect. Now for fleece, fleece has one side that has stretch to it and then one side that would not have stretch. It's like a two-way stretch. So before you get started, be sure you figure out which side of your fleece has that stretch, as that's what you want to be the width of your mittens. So to be going across your hand, that way it kind of stretches when you put the mitten on. You don't necessarily need it to stretch long ways. It'll be better to have it stretch towards like the width of your hand instead. So now for the pattern itself, I saw lots of people online talk about this. You can really just trace out your hand. I would say to make it much larger than what you think your hand would be. I have very tiny wrist, so like for my hand to wrist, I really had to increase the wrist portion so that it'd be able to fit over my hand when I put the mitten on. So here is what my pattern piece looks like. So now I'm just going to use my regular scissors to cut this out. Of course, when we're working with this, since this is paper, be sure to use your regular scissors and not fabric shears. And I'm just going to be cutting out this pattern piece, and then once I have it done, I'm just going to be placing it on top of my fleece. Now I'm going to be cutting out both the front and the back of the mitten at the same time, so I have just laid this out and then I'm going to be pinning it up. I found that pins worked a lot easier than quilting clips for this, especially when you're first starting. You could also use pattern weights though, and then just use your fabric shears and cut into the fleece so that you get that mitten shape. Then once you have this done for one mitten, you are going to be repeating this whole process for the second mitten. Now one thing I will say, I did make the bottom slightly longer than what my pattern was, just so I made sure that there was enough room when it came time for the seam allowance. So I'm just going to go through, cut this out all for the second mitten, and then once I have both mittens, it's time for us starting to begin. So I'm going to match these with right sides together. Your fabric may already have the right sides together, mine did not. And then I am going to pin this up all the way around, except leaving that bottom portion open. So the bottom portion is where we're going to be slipping our hand in. So for that, we just want to leave that open for like where it would go near our wrist. Now, as a completely optional step, I did get a little bit of extra fleece, and I am just going to cut out two small rectangles. So you can figure out whichever way your fleece stretches if you want to take that into account. You don't necessarily need to though, but I'm just going to be cutting out two rectangles, and I'm going to be adding snaps onto it so that I can keep my mittens together. So here's one of my little small rectangle pieces, and I am going to take my mitten, and I am just going to insert it into this straight edge side. And as you can see, I'm just putting it in there so there'll be a little tab on the outside. And then I'm just going to be sewing this. So at that one point, we'll be sewing up all three layers and then repeating all those steps for the second mitten. So now I'm just going to go to my sewing machine and sew all the way around. For the seam, fleece does have stretch to it, so you want to be sure you're using a stretch stitch. I'm going to be using a lightning stitch for this. You could also use a zigzag stitch though. And then when I was sewing, I had no issue with a regular presser foot, but if you needed, you could use a knit foot or a walking foot. So now I'm just going to go through and sew all the way around my mitten, being cautious when I get to the end that I am not sewing across where the wrist would be. So this is what my mitten looks like. When I got to the thumb portion, I did pivot my fabric to be sure that I was able to just restart that curve. Fleece does not fray, so you really don't need to worry about doing any edge finishing, but if you wanted to, you could always just do an overlock stitch all the way around. So now what it's time to do is start working on the hem at the bottom. So for this, I am just going to fold in the fabric about a quarter to a half of an inch, and then I will just pin that up all the way around. The second mitten, I'm following all the same steps, and it fits well too. You can see we have that little tab at the bottom that'll help us keep the mittens together. So now for the hem, I'm just going around pinning up that quarter to a half of an inch seam. And again, fleece does not fray, so I'm not being too worried about doing any edge finishing. You definitely could though go through and do an overlock or a zigzag stitch along the outside just to give it a little bit more support if you wanted to do that. So now I'm just going to go through, use my lightning stitch again, because remember this is that fleece stretch, so you want to be sure you're using some sort of stretch stitch. I did take my time with this. So it is kind of a smaller little opening, so you want to be sure you're just taking your time, readjusting your fabric as you sew around that curve. And then once you get to the start and end, you will want to knot off those threads. So I have both my mittens done. They both look really good. They look really fun. And as you can see, we have these little tabs at the bottom. Now again, these tabs are completely optional. I just did it so that I'd be able to keep the mittens together. I'm going to try to use these plastic snaps. Personally, I have both good and bad luck with them. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I found that it really helped if you are going to be using these plastic snaps that you do want to make the little hole in the fleece before you get started. And then for the plastic snaps, the way that this works is there's like a male connector and a female connector, and then you have the main button. Mine came with the instructions, but you can get this kit on Amazon if you're interested. And then you have to snap it in place, and there's a special tool that allows you to do that. So I have all of my pieces set up, so now it's just time to snap it all in place. Now I think if you did not want to go out and buy a whole new set of little plastic snaps, you could definitely have just used your normal regular snaps that you can get from the store, and they would have just worked just as well, especially since a lot of those do come in different coatings and colors. I had these on hand though and decided to give them a shot. Here's what the snap looks like once it is in, and then you repeat that for the second mitten, and then you're able to put them together, and it actually does hold really well. I do like how it's plastic. This makes it a lot easier to wash these. So here is what my mittens look like. I think they're so cute. The pattern matching on the side is a 10 out of 10, and I think that these are really fun for winter. These were so quick and easy to whip up. I think these could be great last minute gifts, or you could just make them for yourself as a fun holiday treat. Let me know if you're going to try to make these mittens, and if you are, be sure to tag me on Instagram. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you want to see next.